Billionaire CEO avoided men for 20 years but falls for a black bartender at first sight. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Cassandra Hale's corner office on the 47th floor, each drop like a bullet against bulletproof glass. At 2:30 a.m., the city below sparkled with scattered lights, but up here in her glass tower, Cassandra felt nothing but the familiar cold that had kept her company for 20 years. She stared at the quarterly reports spread across her mahogany desk, numbers that would make most people dizzy with excitement. Hale Industries had just closed a $3.2 billion acquisition, cementing her position as one of the most powerful women in America. At 38, she commanded respect in boardrooms where men twice her age trembled at her presence. Forbes had called her the Ice Queen of Wall Street, and she wore that title like armor. But tonight something felt different. Maybe it was the way her assistant had looked at her earlier, with a mixture of admiration and pity that made her stomach twist. Or perhaps it was the wedding invitation sitting unopened on her desk, sent by her college roommate who'd somehow managed to balance a successful career with love, marriage, and 2 beautiful children. Cassandra picked up the ivory envelope, her perfectly manicured fingers tracing the elegant script. Sarah Chin Martinez? Even the hyphenated name felt like a rebuke to everything Cassandra had chosen. She'd built an empire by shutting out every distraction, every weakness, every soft emotion that could be used against her. Love was the ultimate trap. She'd learned that lesson at 18 when Michael had tried to use her feelings to manipulate her into giving up her Harvard MBA for his failed startup dreams. Never again. She tossed the invitation into the trash without opening it and gathered her reports. The numbers blurred together as exhaustion finally caught up with her. When was the last time she'd left the office before midnight? When was the last time she'd done something, anything, that wasn't calculated to advance her business empire? The thought hit her like a physical blow. She couldn't remember. Cassandra stood abruptly, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor as she paced to the window. The city looked different from up here, distant, untouchable, just like her. She pressed her palm against the cold glass, watching her breath fog the surface. Somewhere down there, people were living real lives, making connections, taking risks that had nothing to do with profit margins and market shares. "Miss Hale?" Her night security guard's voice crackled through the intercom. "Would you like me to call your driver?" She hesitated. Marcus had been waiting in the parking garage for 3 hours, probably reading his mystery novels and drinking cold coffee from his thermos. The smart thing would be to go home to her empty penthouse, review tomorrow's presentations, and get 4 hours of sleep before another 16-hour day. Instead, she heard herself saying, "No, thank you, James. I'll find my own way home tonight." 15 minutes later, Cassandra walked out of her building for the first time in months without a security detail, without Marcus, without any of the barriers she'd built around herself. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets gleaming under the streetlights. She pulled her Hermes coat tighter around her shoulders and started walking. She had no destination in mind, no plan, something that would have horrified her business rivals who believed she choreographed every move 3 steps ahead. Her feet carried her through the financial district, past the late-night diners where taxi drivers grabbed quick meals, past the 24-hour convenience stores where shift workers bought energy drinks and lottery tickets. This was a New York she'd forgotten existed. Raw, unfiltered, real. The neon sign caught her eye first. "Murphy's Last Call," in faded red letters, with a shamrock that flickered intermittently. It wasn't the kind of place where billionaire CEOs typically spent their evenings. The windows were fogged with condensation, and she could hear the low murmur of conversation and soft jazz music spilling onto the sidewalk. For 20 years, Cassandra had made every decision based on risk assessment, cost-benefit analysis, and strategic positioning. This time, she simply pushed open the door and stepped inside. The bar was smaller than her office bathroom, with maybe a dozen patrons scattered across worn leather bar stools and corner booths. The air smelled of aged whiskey and honest conversation. A few people glanced up when she entered, but without recognition. Here, she was just another woman seeking shelter from the night. "What can I get you?" The voice made her look up from studying the vintage beer signs on the walls. Behind the bar stood a man who seemed to command the small space with quiet confidence. He was tall, with dark skin that caught the amber light from the vintage fixtures above, and eyes that held genuine warmth, something she'd almost forgotten existed. His movements were economical and practiced as he dried glasses with a worn towel, but there was an elegance to them that reminded her of a dancer or an artist. Cassandra realized she had no idea how to order a drink in a place like this. Her usual haunts were five-star restaurants where sommelier knew her preferences by heart. "What would you recommend?" He smiled, and something inside her chest shifted, a sensation she hadn't felt in so long she'd forgotten its name. "Depends on what kind of night you're having. Celebrating or surviving?" The question was casual, but his dark eyes seemed to see straight through her designer armor to something she'd buried so deep she'd convinced herself it no longer existed. Cassandra found herself studying his face, the strong line of his jaw, the way his mouth curved when he smiled, the genuine interest in his expression that had nothing to do with her net worth or her power. "Surviving," she heard herself admit. "Then you need something that'll warm you from the inside out." He reached for a bottle of bourbon she'd never heard of, poured 2 fingers into a rocks glass, and slid it across the polished wood. "This should do the trick." Their fingers brushed when she reached for the glass, and Cassandra felt electricity shoot up her arm. She jerked her hand back as if she'd been burned, but not before she saw recognition flash in his eyes. He'd felt it too. "I'm Darius," he said simply, extending his hand properly this time. She stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment. In her world, every introduction came with calculations: who this person knew, what they wanted from her, how they could be useful or dangerous. But something in Darius's steady gaze told her this was different. This was just human connection, offered without agenda. "Cassandra," she said finally, taking his hand. The warmth of his palm against hers sent another jolt through her system, and she had to fight the urge to pull away again. "Well, Cassandra," he said, releasing her hand slowly, "what brings you to Murphy's at this hour? Besides survival, I mean." She took a sip of the bourbon, feeling it burn a path down her throat and settle warmly in her chest. How could she explain that she'd spent 20 years building walls so high she'd forgotten what the world looked like from ground level? That success had become her prison, and tonight she'd finally realized she'd lost the key? "I wanted to remember what it felt like to be human," she said quietly. Darius nodded as if this made perfect sense. "And how's that working out so far?" Cassandra looked around the bar, at the older couple sharing a quiet conversation in the corner booth, at the construction worker at the end of the bar reading a paperback novel, at the way the soft light made everything feel warm and alive. Then she looked back at Darius, who was watching her with patient curiosity, as if he had all the time in the world to wait for her answer. For the first time in 20 years, Cassandra Hale smiled without calculating the cost. "Better than I expected," she admitted. And in that moment, watching Darius's answering smile transform his entire face, she felt something crack in the ice around her heart, something that had been frozen for so long she'd forgotten it could thaw. The Ice Queen of Wall Street had just met her match, and she didn't even know his last name. 3 weeks. That's how long Cassandra managed to keep her secret visits to Murphy's last call hidden from the world that watched her every move. 3 weeks of stolen moments between 16-hour workdays, 3 weeks of learning that Darius Washington had a master's degree in literature but chose bartending because he loved the stories people told him, 3 weeks of feeling human again. She should have been more careful. Cassandra stared at her phone screen in horror as her publicist Miranda's panicked voice crackled through the speaker. "I'm sending you the photos now. We need to control this narrative immediately." The images loaded one by one, each worse than the last. There she was, unmistakably Cassandra Hale, leaving Murphy's at 1:47 a.m. according to the timestamp. Her hair was slightly messed from Darius's fingers running through it during their first kiss the night before. Her lipstick was gone. Her usually perfect composure was replaced by something the photographer had perfectly captured, a woman glowing with happiness. The headlines were already spreading across social media like wildfire. Ice Queen melts for Mystery Man, Billionaire Hale's secret midnight rendezvous. Is Cassandra Hale dating down? How bad is it? Cassandra asked, though she could already feel the familiar walls slamming back up around her heart. The morning shows are calling. TMZ wants an exclusive. The Wall Street Journal is running a piece about how your personal life affects shareholder confidence. Miranda's voice was getting higher with each word. Cassandra, who is he? Please tell me he's at least someone respectable. A doctor, a lawyer, anyone with credentials we can spin. Cassandra closed her eyes, picturing Darius as he looked the night before, sleeves rolled up, mixing drinks with the precision of an artist, telling her about the novel he was writing in his spare time. The way he'd listened when she talked about the loneliness of always being the smartest person in the room. How he'd kissed her so gently, as if she were something precious instead of something to be conquered. He's a bartender, she said quietly. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for an eternity. Then, please tell me you're joking. His name is Darius Washington. He works at Murphy's Last Call. He has a literature degree from Columbia, and he's one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. Columbia is good, Miranda said desperately. We can work with Columbia. But Cassandra, a bartender? Do you have any idea what Richard Blackstone is going to do with this? Richard Blackstone. Her biggest rival, the man who'd been circling Hale Industries like a vulture for years, waiting for any sign of weakness. He'd tried hostile takeovers, corporate espionage, and public character assassination. None of it had worked because Cassandra had never given him an opening. Until now. Her phone buzzed with notifications. Text messages, emails, missed calls from board members, investors, business partners. Each notification felt like another nail in her coffin. The worst part was the comments already flooding social media. Users hiding behind anonymous profiles, dissecting every aspect of her life. Guess the Ice Queen was thirsty after all, sweat droplets, rich white woman playing with the help. Typical. When you're that desperate, you'll take anything faced with tears of joy. There goes her credibility. Can't trust a woman who thinks with her hormones. Cassandra's hands shook as she scrolled through the vicious commentary. 20 years of building respect, of proving herself in rooms full of men who'd questioned her every decision, and it was all crumbling because she dared to feel something real. Her assistant knocked on the door. Miss Hale? The board wants to schedule an emergency meeting for this afternoon. And there are reporters in the lobby. Tell security to clear them out. Cassandra snapped, then caught herself. None of this was her assistant's fault. I'm sorry, Jennifer. Please reschedule my morning appointments and get me Richardson from legal on the phone. As Jennifer hurried out, Cassandra's phone rang. The caller ID made her stomach drop. Darius. Don't answer it. Miranda warned through the speaker. We need to establish distance immediately. I'm drafting a statement saying this was a misunderstanding, that you were simply patronizing a local business. No. Cassandra's voice cut through Miranda's panic like a blade. I'm not throwing him under the bus for my mistakes. Cassandra, listen to me. Your stock price has already dropped 3 points since the story broke. The board is going to demand answers. Your investors are questioning your judgment. We can fix this, but you need to cut all contact with this man immediately. The phone continued ringing. Cassandra could picture Darius at Murphy's, probably dealing with his own storm of unwanted attention. How many reporters were harassing him right now? How many photographers were camping outside his apartment? She'd brought this chaos into his quiet, honest life. She'd turned him into tabloid fodder simply by being herself. The ringing stopped. Then started again immediately. He doesn't deserve this, Cassandra whispered. Neither do you, Miranda said more gently. But this is the world we live in. Powerful women don't get the luxury of messy personal lives. You know this better than anyone. Cassandra did know it. She'd watched other female executives get destroyed for far less than dating someone the media deemed inappropriate. She'd seen brilliant women lose everything because they dared to be human instead of perfect. But she'd also learned what it felt like to be seen, truly seen, by someone who valued her mind over her money. For 3 weeks, she'd remembered what it was like to laugh without calculating the political implications. To trust without running background checks. The phone rang a third time. This time, she answered. Cassandra? Darius's voice was steady, but she could hear the concern underneath. Are you okay? There are photographers outside the bar, and someone said. I'm so sorry. She interrupted, her voice breaking. I never meant for this to happen. I never meant to drag you into my world. Hey, he said softly. Look at me. I can't. You don't understand. Then help me understand. Talk to me. And for one moment, Cassandra almost did. Almost told him everything. About the board meeting, about Blackstone, about the 20 years of careful image management that was crashing down around her ears. Instead, she hung up. Because the Ice Queen of Wall Street knew how this story ended, and she couldn't bear to watch Darius get destroyed in the crossfire. The Hale Industries boardroom had never felt smaller. Cassandra sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, her spine straight and her expression carefully neutral, while 12 pairs of eyes studied her like specimens under a microscope. The morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows should have felt warm, but today it felt like a spotlight exposing every crack in her armor. Stock price is down 8% since Monday, announced CFO Margaret Wells, sliding a tablet across the table. Our shareholders are concerned about leadership stability. Cassandra didn't need to look at the numbers. She'd been watching them fall in real time for 3 days, each point drop feeling like a physical blow. But she kept her voice steady. Market volatility is normal. We've weathered worse storms. Have we? Richard Blackstone's voice cut through the room like a blade. She should have known he'd be here. Somehow, her rival had managed to secure a guest seat at her own board meeting, probably through his alliance with board member Harrison Burke. Because I don't recall our CEO ever being photographed stumbling out of dive bars at 2 in the morning. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Cassandra felt the familiar ice forming around her heart, the protective shell she'd worn for 20 years. But underneath it, something was different now. She could still feel the warmth of Darius's hand in hers, still hear his laugh echoing in the quiet corners of her mind. My personal life has no bearing on my ability to run this company, she said coolly. Doesn't it? Burke leaned forward, his gray mustache twitching with barely concealed satisfaction. He'd been waiting for this moment since she'd beaten him out for the CEO position 5 years ago. Cassandra, you've built your reputation on being above human weakness. The Ice Queen who never makes emotional decisions. Now you're caught sneaking around with some bartender like a teenager. His name is Darius Washington, Cassandra said quietly. And he's more intelligent than half the people in this room. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she saw several board members exchange glances. Margaret Wells actually winced. This is exactly what we're talking about, Burke continued, his voice rising. You're defending him. You're emotionally compromised. How can shareholders trust you to make rational decisions about billion-dollar deals when you can't even make rational decisions about your own love life? Harrison. The voice belonged to David Chin, the only board member who'd supported her rise to CEO from the beginning. That's enough. Is it? Blackstone stood up, pulling out his phone. Because I have something else to share with the board. He pressed a button, and suddenly the room filled with Darius's voice, recorded from what sounded like a phone interview. Cassandra is brilliant, but she's also lonely. She told me she'd forgotten what it felt like to be human. That's not the kind of person who should be making decisions that affect thousands of employees. Cassandra's blood ran cold. The interview had been taken out of context, twisted to make her sound unstable, but the damage was immediate. She could see it in the faces around the table, doubt creeping in where there had once been unwavering confidence. When did he say this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. This morning, Blackstone replied with obvious satisfaction. Channel 7 News. Full interview airs tonight, but I thought the board should see a preview. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. 3 days ago, she'd hung up on Darius to protect him. She'd ignored his calls, his texts, his attempts to reach her through Murphy's. She'd cut him out of her life to save his reputation, and this was how he repaid her? Of course. Burke nodded sagely. This could all be avoided if we act quickly. Cassandra, we're prepared to offer you a generous severance package. You can step down quietly, blame it on wanting to pursue other interests. Your reputation stays somewhat intact. And who would replace me? Cassandra asked, though she already knew the answer. The board has discussed several options, Burke said carefully. Richard has expressed interest in a merger that would benefit all shareholders. There it was. The real reason for this meeting, the true purpose behind the manufactured crisis. Blackstone hadn't just capitalized on her scandal, he'd orchestrated it. The paparazzi photos, the media frenzy, even Darius's interview. It was all part of a carefully planned coup. You set this up, she said, looking directly at Blackstone. All of it. He shrugged. I simply took advantage of your poor judgment. You made yourself vulnerable, Cassandra. In business, that's a fatal mistake. The vote is scheduled for Friday, Margaret Wells said quietly. She looked uncomfortable, but Cassandra could see she'd already made up her mind. We need your decision before then. Step down voluntarily, or face a vote of no confidence. Cassandra looked around the table at the faces of people she'd worked with for years, people whose careers she'd advanced, whose trust she'd earned through results and dedication. Now they were ready to throw her away because she dared to fall in love. How long? She asked. How long for what? Burke frowned. How long have you been planning this? How long have you been waiting for me to show weakness so you could pounce? The silence that followed was answer enough. You have until Thursday at noon to decide, Burke said finally. Resign gracefully, or we'll do this the hard way. As the board members filed out, chattering among themselves like vultures picking at a carcass, Cassandra remained seated at the head of the table. Through the windows, she could see the city sprawling below her, her city, her empire, everything she'd sacrificed 20 years of her life to build. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. They made me say those things. It wasn't what I meant. Let me explain. Please. D. For a moment, Cassandra felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Darius hadn't betrayed her. Maybe there was more to the story. Then reality crashed back down. It didn't matter what he'd meant to say. The damage was done. Her enemies had the ammunition they needed, and her allies were already jumping ship. She had 48 hours to choose between the empire she'd built and the man who'd reminded her she was human. For the first time in 20 years, Cassandra Hale didn't know what her next move would be. Cassandra found herself standing outside Murphy's last call at 11:30 p.m., her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. She'd spent the entire day in strategy meetings, calling in favors, trying to shore up support among the board members. But every conversation ended the same way, with polite sympathy and carefully worded suggestions that maybe stepping down wasn't such a bad idea. The bar looked different now, tainted by the circus of reporters and photographers who'd been camping outside for days. Someone had spray-painted, "Sellout," across the brick wall, and broken glass glittered on the sidewalk where paparazzi had fought for the best angle. Through the foggy window, she could see Darius behind the bar, moving with the same quiet grace she remembered. But his shoulders were tense, and dark circles under his eyes suggested he'd been sleeping as poorly as she had. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and the few patrons looked up with curiosity that quickly turned to recognition. She heard whispers, saw phones being pulled out for surreptitious photos. But Darius's eyes never left her face. We're closed, he called out to the room, his voice carrying quiet authority. Everyone out. Now. To her surprise, the customers didn't argue. They gathered their belongings and filed out without complaint, as if they understood this moment was bigger than their entertainment. Within minutes, the bar was empty except for Cassandra and Darius. You came, he said simply. I shouldn't have. She remained by the door, keeping the length of the room between them. This makes everything worse. Worse than what? Worse than you disappearing for 3 days without explanation? Worse than me finding out you think I betrayed you from your lawyer's cease and desist letter? Cassandra winced. She'd authorized the legal letter in a moment of rage and pain, but seeing the hurt in his eyes made her realize how it must have looked. I saw the interview. They ambushed me. Darius interrupted, moving around the bar toward her. 2 reporters showed up at my apartment at 6 in the morning, shoving cameras in my face, asking if it was true that you were using me as some kind of midlife crisis experiment. They kept twisting everything I said, asking the same questions over and over until I was exhausted and confused. He stopped a few feet away from her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same scent that had been haunting her dreams. I tried to defend you, Cassandra. I tried to tell them how brilliant you are, how you light up when you talk about the literacy programs your company funds, how you remember every employee's name. But they only aired the parts that made you look unstable. The sincerity in his voice cracked something inside her chest. It doesn't matter what you meant to say. The damage is done. Is that what this is about? Damage control? His voice rose, frustration bleeding through his usual calm. Because if that's all I am to you, a liability to be managed, then maybe they're right about us. Don't. The word came out sharper than she intended. You have no idea what's at stake here. Then tell me. He closed the remaining distance between them, his hands reaching for hers. Help me understand why you're willing to throw away what we have without even fighting for it. Cassandra pulled her hands away, wrapping her arms around herself like armor. Because fighting means losing everything I've built. Do you know what it's like to be a woman in my position? To have every decision questioned, every emotion scrutinized, every relationship dissected for signs of weakness? I've spent 20 years proving I'm strong enough, smart enough, cold enough to deserve my place at that table. And what has that gotten you? Darius asked quietly. A corner office and an empty bed? A bank account full of money and a heart full of nothing? The words hit their mark, and she felt tears threatening, another weakness she couldn't afford. It's gotten me the power to employ 12,000 people. To fund scholarship programs and medical research and environmental initiatives that actually change lives. If I lose that, if I let them destroy me over this, what happens to all of that good? What happens to you? He countered. You told me you'd forgotten how to be human. Well, human beings don't sacrifice love for corporate approval. Human beings fight for what matters. You think this is easy for me? The dam finally burst, and 20 years of suppressed emotion came pouring out. You think I want to give you up? These past 3 weeks have been the happiest I've been since I can't even remember when. When I'm with you, I remember who I used to be before I became this ice-cold machine. But I can't be selfish. Too many people are depending on me. Darius stepped closer again, and this time she didn't pull away. What if there was another way? What if instead of hiding who you are, you showed the world that a leader can be strong and vulnerable, successful and human? The world doesn't want complex women in power. She whispered. They want us to be either saints or demons, ice queens or emotional wrecks. There's no room for anything in between. Then maybe it's time to create that room. His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Maybe it's time to stop playing by their rules. For a moment, Cassandra let herself lean into his touch, let herself imagine a world where she could have both love and success, where vulnerability was strength instead of weakness. But then reality crashed back in. Tomorrow the board votes, she said, stepping back from his warmth. If I don't resign by noon, they'll remove me. Either way, I lose my company. But you won't lose yourself, Darius said firmly. And you won't lose me. Not unless you choose to. Cassandra looked at him, really looked, and saw everything she'd been afraid to want. Not just love, but partnership. Not just passion, but understanding. Someone who saw through her carefully constructed facade to the woman underneath and loved her anyway. They'll destroy you too, she warned. The media, the scrutiny, the constant judgment. Is that really what you want? Darius smiled, the same warm smile that had started this whole mess. Cassandra, I've been a black man in America my whole life. You think I don't know about judgment? About having to work twice as hard to get half as much respect? The difference is, I've never had something worth fighting for like this. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to a news article. Look at this. Murphy's Bartender stands by Hale Industries CEO. It ran an hour ago. Full interview unedited. I told them exactly what you mean to me. Cassandra read the headline with growing amazement. Instead of distance or denial, Darius had doubled down, publicly declaring his feelings despite the media circus surrounding them. You beautiful, stubborn fool, she whispered. Takes one to know one, he replied, pulling her into his arms. As she melted against his chest, Cassandra realized something had shifted inside her. The fear was still there, the uncertainty about tomorrow's vote, the knowledge that her enemies were circling. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't facing the battle alone. Whatever happens tomorrow, she said against his shoulder, I won't hide anymore. Good, Darius murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Because the world needs to see the real Cassandra Hale. And I plan to be right beside you when they do. The Hale Industries press room had never hosted anything like this. By 10:30 a.m., every major news outlet in the city had crammed into the space, cameras rolling, reporters elbowing for position. The air crackled with anticipation and barely concealed bloodlust. They could all sense that the Ice Queen was about to fall, and they wanted front-row seats for the execution. In her office 2 floors above, Cassandra adjusted her navy blazer one final time and looked at herself in the mirror. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, professional but not cold, authoritative but not intimidating. For once, she wanted to look human. Are you sure about this? Miranda asked for the 10th time, pacing behind her like a caged animal. The board meeting isn't until noon. We still have time to work out a quiet resignation. You don't have to go nuclear. Yes, I do. Cassandra's voice was steadier than she felt. Through her office window, she could see protesters gathering outside the building, some supporting her, others calling for her resignation. The world was watching, waiting to see what she would do next. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in. To her surprise, it was David Chen, the one board member who'd remained loyal throughout the crisis. His face was grave as he closed the door behind him. Cassandra, I just got word from Burke's camp. The vote is rigged. They've already secured 7 votes against you, with 2 more wavering. This press conference, it's not going to change anything. The news should have devastated her, but instead Cassandra felt a strange sense of relief. The outcome was predetermined, which meant she was finally free to act without calculating political consequences. Then I guess I have nothing left to lose, she said quietly. David studied her face with concern. What are you planning? Before she could answer, another knock echoed through the office. This time, security escorted in someone who made Cassandra's heart skip a beat. Darius stood in her doorway wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that transformed him from bartender to businessman without diminishing an ounce of his natural charisma. His presence filled the room with quiet strength, and Cassandra felt her resolve crystallize into diamond-hard determination. You came, she breathed. I told you I'd be beside you, he replied simply. Are you ready for this? Miranda looked between them in growing horror. Cassandra, please tell me you're not planning to. Ladies and gentlemen, the PA system crackled to life. Miss Hale will address the media in 5 minutes. David Chen shook his head sadly. This is career suicide. Maybe, Cassandra agreed, taking Darius's offered arm. Or maybe it's the first honest thing I've done in 20 years. The walk to the elevator felt like a death march. With each step, Cassandra could feel the weight of her empire pressing down on her shoulders. 12,000 employees, billions in assets, decades of careful reputation building. Everything she'd sacrificed her personal life to create was about to crumble because she'd chosen love over fear. Second thoughts? Darius murmured as the elevator descended. Dozens, she admitted. But I'm done living in a cage of other people's expectations. The elevator doors opened to reveal a wall of sound, camera shutters clicking, reporters shouting questions, the low roar of barely controlled chaos. Cassandra had held hundreds of press conferences over the years, but never one where her personal life was the headline. She walked to the podium with Darius beside her, and the room gradually fell silent. Every eye was focused on them, every camera capturing the moment when the Ice Queen chose to melt in public. "Good morning," Cassandra began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "I called this press conference to address the speculation about my personal life and its impact on my ability to lead this company." She paused, looking out at the sea of expectant faces. In the back, she spotted Richard Blackstone leaning against the wall with a satisfied smirk. He thought he'd already won. "For 20 years, I've been exactly what this industry demanded: cold, calculating, emotionally unavailable. I've made decisions based solely on profit margins and shareholder value, never allowing personal feelings to influence my judgment. This approach has made Hale Industries one of the most successful companies in America." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This wasn't the resignation speech they'd expected. But success built on the denial of basic human emotion is ultimately hollow. 3 weeks ago, I met someone who reminded me that strength doesn't come from isolation, it comes from connection. Intelligence doesn't require emotional poverty. Leadership doesn't demand the sacrifice of love. She turned slightly toward Darius, drawing him into the frame of every camera. "This is Darius Washington. He's brilliant, compassionate, and yes, he works as a bartender. He's also the man I love, and I refuse to apologize for that love or hide it to satisfy outdated expectations about how powerful women should behave." The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions over each other, cameras flashed like lightning, and Cassandra could see Blackstone's smirk faltering into shock. She raised her hand for silence, and somehow, impossibly, got it. "I know there are those who believe that loving someone makes me weak, that caring about human connection compromises my business judgment. To them, I say this: a leader who has never risked her heart for something greater than herself cannot truly understand the hearts of those she leads." Darius's hand found hers at the podium, their fingers intertwining in full view of every camera. The gesture was simple, but the symbolism was revolutionary, a billionaire CEO claiming her right to love without apology. "The board will vote on my leadership today," Cassandra continued. "They may choose to remove me for the crime of being human. But I will not resign. I will not hide. And I will not pretend that loving someone is a weakness rather than the greatest strength I've ever found." She looked directly into the main camera, knowing her words were being broadcast live across the country. "To every woman watching this who has been told she must choose between success and love, between power and vulnerability, I say, refuse the choice. Demand both. The world needs leaders who understand that true strength comes not from ice, but from fire." The room fell completely silent for a heartbeat. Then chaos erupted as every reporter began shouting at once, but Cassandra was already walking away from the podium, Darius's hand warm and steady in hers. She had just committed professional suicide on live television. And for the first time in 20 years, she felt completely alive. The silence in Cassandra's office was deafening. It had been 6 hours since the press conference, and the outside world had exploded into a frenzy of commentary, analysis, and speculation. But inside her sanctuary on the 47th floor, time seemed suspended. Darius sat across from her desk, still in his charcoal suit, watching her scroll through the endless stream of responses on her tablet. His presence was a steady anchor in the chaos that had become her life. "Billionaire CEO shows true leadership by embracing authenticity," she read aloud from one headline. "Wall Street's Ice Queen melts hearts across America." "That one's from the Times." "And the bad ones?" Darius asked gently. "Hale's emotional breakdown signals end of era. Love-struck CEO abandons shareholders for bartender romance." She set down the tablet and rubbed her temples. "It's exactly what I expected. Half the world thinks I'm brave, the other half thinks I'm insane." Miranda burst through the door without knocking, her face flushed with excitement and disbelief. "Cassandra, you need to see this. The phones haven't stopped ringing." She thrust a stack of printouts across the desk. 3 major pension funds just released statements supporting your leadership. The teachers' union called you a role model for authentic leadership. And look at this. Miranda pulled out her phone, showing a video that had already garnered 2 million views. It was a compilation of women from all walks of life, CEOs, doctors, teachers, students, speaking directly to the camera about their own struggles to balance success with personal happiness. They're calling it the Cassandra Challenge, Miranda explained breathlessly. Women sharing their stories about being told they have to choose between career and love. It's everywhere: Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. You've started a movement. Cassandra stared at the screen in wonder. A young lawyer in Chicago talked about hiding her engagement to avoid seeming unfocused at work. A surgeon in Seattle described being passed over for department head because she was too emotional after her divorce. A tech entrepreneur from Silicon Valley shared how she'd pretended to be single for years to maintain her company's serious image. This is bigger than just you now, Darius observed quietly. You've given permission for half the population to be human. Before Cassandra could respond, David Chen appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. The vote? She asked, though she already knew the answer from his face. 7-5. You're out. David's voice was heavy with regret. Burke's already calling himself interim CEO. Cassandra nodded, surprised by how little the news stung. She'd been prepared for this outcome since the moment she'd decided to hold the press conference. There's more, David continued. Richard Blackstone is furious. Apparently, his hostile takeover bid was contingent on you being seen as weak and unstable. Instead, you're being hailed as a visionary leader who puts principles above profit. Several major investors have withdrawn from his consortium. A small smile played at the corners of Cassandra's mouth. How unfortunate for him. Cassandra. David stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him. I resigned from the board 20 minutes ago. So did Margaret Wells and Thomas Morrison. We're not the only ones. She looked up sharply. What? Half the board just walked out in protest. Burke's interim position is already being challenged by shareholders who are questioning the legitimacy of removing a CEO during the most profitable quarter in company history. David's smile was grim but satisfied. You may have lost the battle, but the war is far from over. Before anyone could respond, Cassandra's assistant Jennifer rushed in, clutching a phone. Miss Hale, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a call you need to take. It's Elizabeth Warren's office. The room fell silent. Senator Warren had been a vocal advocate for corporate accountability and women's rights, but a call from her office suggested this story had reached the highest levels of American politics. Cassandra took the phone. This is Cassandra Hale. The conversation was brief, but when she hung up, her eyes were bright with possibility. What did she want? Miranda asked. She's introducing legislation requiring corporate boards to justify any CEO removal with concrete performance metrics rather than subjective character assessments. She wants to call it the Hale Act. Cassandra shook her head in amazement. I've become a case study in gender discrimination in corporate America. Her phone buzzed with another call, this time from her lawyer. 3 other companies have reached out through back channels, he reported after a quick conversation. They want to discuss CEO positions. Apparently, your authentic leadership style is exactly what their boards are looking for in this changing market. Cassandra looked around the room at the faces of her friends and allies, at Miranda's excited chatter about book deals and speaking engagements, at David's quiet pride in her courage. Finally, her eyes settled on Darius, who'd been watching everything unfold with calm attention. No regrets? He asked softly. She thought about the question seriously. 24 hours ago, she'd been the unchallenged CEO of a Fortune 500 company, feared and respected throughout the business world. Now she was unemployed, facing an uncertain future, and had become the center of a national conversation about women's rights in the workplace. But she was also sitting across from a man who loved her not for her power or wealth, but for the person she was underneath all the titles and achievements. She was free to speak her mind without calculating political consequences. She was human again, gloriously and messily human. None, she said firmly. For the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Outside her office windows, the sun was setting over the city she'd once ruled from her glass tower. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new adventures. But tonight she was going home with the man she loved, to a life built on truth rather than strategy. The Ice Queen of Wall Street was gone. In her place stood Cassandra Hale, flawed, brave, and finally, completely free. She took Darius's hand and walked out of her corner office for the last time, leaving behind 20 years of careful control for a future she couldn't predict or manage. It was the best decision she'd ever made.